If you watched my previous video, you'll know my position on Red Dead Redemption, though come to think of it, my channel speaks for itself in that regard. However, I seldom speak about Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. There's a few reasons for that. It's a brilliant expansion to Red Dead Redemption, but with zombies. I'm not huge on zombie games, I never have been. It's a tired horror trope that is impossible to take seriously. Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare is far from the 10 out of 10 experience it's made out to be by many, but hear me out. I like it, but there is a duality. There isn't an awful lot to cover from Undead Nightmare outside a video like this for a channel like mine, so with that in mind I think a throwback to Undead Nightmare is long overdue. Released on the 26th of October 2010, a few months following the main release of Red Dead Redemption and exactly 8 years before the release of Red Dead Redemption 2, this is where Rockstar really embraced the parody elements of this universe and pushed them to the forefront in a wacky story that hinges on being ridiculous to the highest degree. There's no need to care for it making sense, because Red Dead Redemption has the story covered. If you want your authentic spaghetti western experience, that's 100% what springs to mind. That's the base game. This, however, is every bit as utterly mental as you'd hope. So in today's video, we're going to be exploring how Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare gives us that thoroughly, utterly, absolutely wacky ride, and just maybe why it's loved by so many. So please, grab your biscuits and your brews, and enjoy the video. For the most part, Undead Nightmare's plot primarily exists as an excuse to explore the sillier side of the world in a flowing narrative, whilst also serving as ample excuse to traverse this expansive world space and kill people indiscriminately. The humour is far richer, with greater exaggerations in dialogue, and greater hilarity on a more regular basis.
Anyone here?
In here, mister.
Come out. It's okay. Come out. I don't bite. Bad joke.
The world of Red Dead can explore its comedy far more openly in a fundamentally absurd plot that doesn't need nor want to be taken seriously.
Folks okay?
Oh, just fantastic. I just saw my daughter get eaten by some creature sent straight from hell. Thanks for asking.
I'm kind of sorry I did.
Zombies was an interesting trope to choose. In horror, there's nothing less terrifying than hordes of the undead. It's a tired, even mundane subcategory of horror that isn't especially captivating within itself, and that actually works perfectly for Undead Nightmare, or at least simply as well as it can. Why? Because like many zombie games, it really is not horror. Many games attempt to do what Undead Nightmare does, inspired, or more than likely not, because zombies are funny. They just are. A tired commentary on humans being grotesque monsters simply brought to the surface, and aimlessly consuming everything, specifically other people, in its path. Undead Nightmare makes it very clear that it understands that. Not every game that attempts to do this quite gets it right though. However, Undead Nightmare boasted one major advantage. So where does Undead Nightmare stand apart on this front? Well, it's Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare. This is an even further exaggerated take on a parody world inside which a tragic story was told. The atmosphere of Red Dead Redemption likens to that of a spaghetti western, and you immerse yourself in that world devoid from any outlandish, fantastical or horrific moments occurring aside from more subjective encounters in the side content, so you're more than likely immersed in the world before you even roll around to playing this expansion. For a non-canon experience to allow us to explore that world space but completely turned upside down by a ridiculous zombie apocalypse, allowing us to really experience the ludicrous undertones of the world we enjoyed whilst not impacting how players perceive the actual lore of Red Dead, means we get to see creative nonsense play out for the sake of amusement, whilst also being able to take a world we as players are already connected to and openly rip the piss out of it. The majority of dialogue in this expansion is ironic, punny, self-aware, or all of the above, and in failing that it's just wacky. Why is that though? Well, Undead Nightmare understands it's exploring a road many games and many movies and avenues of entertainment besides in general have travelled, and uses that understanding to make fun not only of itself, but the very concept it's exploring, and then by extension the attitudes of how people would respond in a time of crisis.
What's going on?
Well, it's the government's fault.
Ain't it always?
Well, they let in too many foreigners. Just shut the goddamn border, or things like this happen. My daughter was just some satanic demon's lunch because of the goddamn government.
It's hardly masterfully done to any degree, but because it has that baseline of a Western theme in keeping with Red Dead Redemption no less, a game that doesn't shy away from parody exaggeration within itself, it works well. Being able to interact with characters we met in the base game and see how they as individuals are navigating the absurd apocalypse they are now in makes for good entertainment, especially when you know it's just a silly story that's about as canon as a fever dream. Seeing Bonnie McFarlane, Nigel West Dickens, Marshall Johnson, Jonah and Eli as zombies, Seth and Landon Ricketts again, delightful. Top piss. I will say, as great as that is, no character lingers for very long. The mission structure is far more open, and not necessarily creatively speaking. Where Undead Nightmare really falters is it really doesn't have that much depth, at least not to the standard set in the base game. It's hard to ask that of a zombie game, an expansion no less, but the limitations of a zombie game don't disappear or become absolved because it's still a game, it just happens to have zombies. The mission design is rather open, repetitive, and at times tedious, though not necessarily infuriating. Whilst a more open mission structure was a breath of fresh air for a Rockstar game, running around clearing out settlements and graveyards of zombies is just painful. Not at first, it's fun for a while, as it should be, but after a bit, that not changing up an awful lot doesn't help its case. Though there are several zombie archetypes, there's nothing necessarily challenging about any of them, so the only solution is to throw more of them at you. Both saving settlements and clearing out graveyards escalate in the exact same fashion. As you traverse the world space, a settlement may become under attack, and if it becomes overrun, you'll have only so long to return and save it before everyone there dies and the place is lost for good, which happens like clockwork. Which is just redundant game design. Why the fuck would I even want to go back there? The side content is fused to the main content. Yes, the survivor stories, or whatever they're called, the expansion equivalent to stranger missions, are often mandatory for continuing the story. Therefore, by the time you are done with a settlement, you are done with the settlement. It falling under attack now has no bearing. So you can either leave it to fall, which is what I do, or you can go back and save it, knowing full well that there's no point. As for the survivor side missions, these are the main side missions in inverted commas, because let's be real, these are main missions in disguise. I don't mind them being a part of the story, but they are listed as side content when they serve as main content, so it can be confusing when you're trying to progress through the story and the next main mission is nowhere to be seen. It takes a moment to realise you need to do some side stuff for the plot to progress, and the game doesn't really specify where you need to go with main mission markers exactly. It just expects that because the main mission won't progress, you're going to double back and do the side content until it does magically appear. So the contents of the main content versus this side content is difficult to distinguish at times too. The best mission in Undead Nightmare is the one where you have to hunt down 6 Sasquatches, wiping Bigfoot off the face of the earth because you're misled into thinking they eat babies when in reality they are peaceful herbivores.
You eat babies. You have to survive. Everyone knows that. Ain't your fault.
We eat berries and mushrooms, you fool! I don't want to fight you!
had about enough of
This plague, it is... We lived here before you.
Now, that's meant to be side content, but it's more in-depth than most of the main content or side content. Even then, it's a unique creature and that's really it. You're just going to random locations, shooting 6 Sasquatches and wiping them out, and that's it. It's worth it for the depressed Bigfoot, but the main takeaway is the mission-to-mission structure is a little bit confused. A lot of the content consists of tedious errands like finding flowers for Nigel West Dickens, finding dynamite and undead lure for Landon Ricketts, which fortunately I had going in, so it's minor. Abducting a specific archetype of undead that's guaranteed to not spawn simply because you are looking for it, so this guy can film it. The list goes on.
Man turned against man. Kind-hearted neighbors turned into savage, flesh-eating monsters. Do you see it? It'll make a fantastic movie.
Who would enjoy that?
What?
What kind of sick person would like that?
That or you're tasked with purifying a graveyard. These are fun at first, but the sheer volume of them is quite a pain. Freeing settlements of the undead hordes through long-winded battles in order to access missions at those places, again, it's fun, and the purpose is to allow you to kill zombies, but it's hardly engaging my brain. There's no outstanding challenge per se, you just need to shoot zombies in the head or they'll keep getting back up. Once you're in that routine, at least until you get the blunderbuss, which causes them to literally explode, oh my god, you're set. The gameplay is fun. It's just more repetitive than it perhaps should be, and the frustration comes through tedium rather than difficulty. Despite this, Undead Nightmare keeps up the Red Dead charm that carries it. Some content is better than others. Rescue missions, though little more than bounty hunts from the base game, are straightforward but western themed, so happy days. The content quality in Undead Nightmare doesn't necessarily match the levels of Red Dead Redemption, but perhaps the game's flaws are just more obvious when the story is far less interesting within itself by design. Even then, I find for the most part Undead Nightmare's mission design to be lacking by comparison, and Red Dead Redemption was hardly innovative in this regard to begin with. Though I will say the atmosphere is still present, the soundtrack playing in the background as you explore the world space still slaps. The more ominous lighting and the green tint on the moon are very nice touches. The map being green, we won't talk about that. Buildings being randomly on fire in oddly specific places is just funny. I think that's by design, especially when you realise half the buildings that are on fire in only small spots are made primarily of wood, and the entire thing should realistically be ablaze by now. Telltale signs of an apocalypse, I guess. Exploring the open world is still enjoyable, especially with undead creatures roaming the wilds such as zombie bears, zombie dogs, zombie wolves, zombie big cats. Inject it straight into my veins. There's no in-game economy, as most people are zombies now. Instead, the currency of the world is bullets. Bullets are scarce and you cannot resupply at shops. You find them on the corpses of the undead, in chests, of which there are plenty at settlements, in aiding people along your travels and in completing missions. Instead of random money appearing, you get ammunition for your weaponry. You can't spend it on anything, but you can give it away in aiding a settlement. But that, in my opinion, is a massive waste. Just shoot the zombies yourselves. In the event you run out of ammo, you have a torch with which you can endlessly burn zombies, which kills them gradually too. As for the blunderbuss, it uses undead bones, meaning you can get plenty of ammo for that from the undead you kill, excluding those you kill with the blunderbuss because you've shattered them into another dimension. So ammo is apparently scarce, but it's also abundant if you know where to look. This may sound like a critique, but it's not. It's an observation. You cannot conventionally buy ammo as there is no in-game economy in Undead Nightmare, nor are there any stores or trading, but you can find it quite easily by simply playing the game. Running out of ammo on your go-to weapon would often mean having to rethink your strategy and actually change up your weaponry at least. You can't go and stock up reliably in between missions, so you simply have to adapt to what you have available. It's not a bad system at all when you think of it like that. Does that drastically change the gameplay experience though? Not massively. However, it's a good way to subtly encourage players to rotate their arsenal to get the most out of the gameplay on that front at least. If you don't aim for the head on zombies, you're more likely to run out than if you spam Deadeye and get busy face shooting, but even then the torch is decent backup. Swing that a bit and watch the undead burn. The gameplay is otherwise just Red Dead Redemption. Quick horses, shooting, nothing has really changed there except I still struggle to pronounce the franchise's title. I will say, finding the horses of the apocalypse was quite fun. These legendary, mythical, magical, demonic almost horses that have infinite stamina. If you don't go out of your way to tame at least one of these bad boys, I can say with chest that you aren't playing Undead Nightmare properly. So satisfying, but not necessarily incredible gameplay in a Red Dead atmosphere with supernatural elements such as zombies, flaming horses and Bigfoot combined in a minor storyline that only serves as an excuse to kill zombies, whilst also demonstrating the parody undertones of this universe in a more open, fully displayed manner, was bound to be appealing. Not only was it appealing, Undead Nightmare is loved to this day by many. As far as I can see, none believe it hits the highs of the base game. After all, it's just an expansion, so we can bicker about some lazy game design as much as we want, but the truth is, it was just more content in a world we came to adore. And that is all it needed to be. The zombie apocalypse take was designed to freshen it up with a different but similar atmosphere, and it accomplishes that. It makes fun of itself thoroughly, and that is its story. It highlights how absurd the concept of the undead actually is, and in doing so highlights how absurd it is in general. It's deliberately ridiculous, and that makes for an entertaining few hours. And at the end of the day, when you put your controller down, that's all that really matters. There was plenty to do in Undead Nightmare. A lot of it draws you back to doing things you've done dozens of times already, finding lost people, rescuing towns, clearing out graveyards. It's not a groundbreaking gameplay, but the experience is fun nonetheless. Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare is loved by many. It's not necessarily a generic zombie game from 2010. It was Red Dead Redemption, but with zombies. The humour carried over and flourished, as did the atmosphere.
America is the land of the free, and that means free to people like me, Herbert Moon.
Absolutely.
No! Oh, no! You can't eat me! I'm Herbert Moon!
It had a point, and that point was to mock generic zombie tropes in entertainment, and it handled that brilliantly, whilst also not taking itself too seriously. Does it absolve the, at times, lazy-feeling mission structures? Not entirely. But all of that enriching world building from the base game put it at an advantage where we could recognise this non-canon entry as an entertaining piss take that only ever aspired to be extra fun and nothing necessarily more. Undead Nightmare is great because of its ability to commit to tomfoolery without becoming jarringly tonally inconsistent, because there's no risk of events here impacting more serious events in the franchise. As the clue's in the name, it's a nightmare. It's about as canon as John having an incredibly vivid dream about killing zombies, and that's all it is.
Jack, be kind to your mother. Abigail, teach the boy right from wrong. Both of you. Stop biting chunks out of people. Be back as soon as I can.
It proves a game doesn't need to break ground on every front to be fun. It just needs engaging characters, which it leans on in the base game to provide. Zombie shooting gameplay, a given for any zombie gaming experience, but the point is standard gameplay that is fun. And an atmosphere that keeps you engaged if nothing else does. Again, Red Dead as the source makes this a doddle. As a result, Undead Nightmare satisfied the craving for more Red Dead in the months following the conclusion of Redemption, and served as something we could allow ourselves to simply not take seriously at all. It's nonsensical mayhem that didn't affect the main story of the base game in any capacity, which truly granted it freedom, and if anything, allowed it to poke fun at itself and the tired trope of the zombie apocalypse. It stands tall to this day for that very reason. So the question I suppose that arises from this is, why was there never an Undead Nightmare 2? It would have been yet another Rockstar Games license to print money. Obviously, with the success of GTA Online, single-player DLCs were far from Rockstar's priority. Red Dead Redemption 2 didn't get an expansion like this in any capacity, but I think it's fair to acknowledge that Red Dead Redemption 2 was never trying to be its predecessor either. There are things it does better than 1, there are things that it does worse, there are things that aren't necessarily as important for 2 than they were for 1, and there are things that are more important for 2 than they were for 1. I personally do not think an Undead Nightmare 2 would have been right for Red Dead Redemption 2. In my opinion, it's a shame we didn't get something like it, but a second zombie apocalypse spin-off wouldn't have been something I'd have been especially stoked for either. Whether or not Undead Nightmare is something that you can only pull off the once, we'll never know, because it never happened again. Rockstar were too busy focusing on creating a lackluster online experience that they could then neglect, in favour of continuing to support an online component to a game released in 2013, because it makes them loads and loads of money. So the reason why we never received an Undead Nightmare 2, above all else, is because of that reason. I can sugarcoat it as much as I want, but compared to online services, I doubt it would have been anywhere near as profitable. It's a shame when fun and interesting ideas are an afterthought in a business model, but everything is run by business, so I guess we'll just have to deal with it. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon.